This is a story, and let's be clear, it's a work of fiction. It's a parable for our times, crafted to remind us of a simple, powerful truth. Heroes rarely wear capes. They don't show up with a grand announcement. More often than not, they walk among us, carrying burdens we can't see, their greatness hidden behind a mask of ordinary exhaustion. This is the story of a man who was judged by his appearance, a man who was dismissed and looked down on, and how the sky itself seemed to open up to remind the world that true honor isn't about the clothes on your back, but the sacrifices you've made. This is the story of the man in seat 22C. He was just a single dad in seat 22C, worn out, a frayed collar on his shirt and bags under his eyes that told a story of sleepless nights and a life lived for someone else. His name was Daniel Hayes, but on this flight, he didn't have a name. He was just an obstacle, an inconvenience. The other passengers didn't see a father. They saw a mess. Whispers and sideways glances followed him down the aisle. A man who, in their eyes, just didn't belong in the polished world of air travel. They were about to get a lesson in humility, a lesson delivered from 35,000 feet. They were about to find out that the plane they were on, the very sky they were in, belonged more to him than any of them. The hum of the airport terminal was a familiar jumble of chaos. Announcements echoed and bled into one another, a mess of destinations Daniel would never see. For him, there was just one destination: home, a small rented house 2 states away that he was barely managing to afford. But it was theirs, his and Lily's. Lily, his 8-year-old daughter, was the beacon of light in his tired world. She held his hand, her small fingers a grounding presence, skipping beside him. Her pigtails, which his own clumsy, grease-stained fingers had tied unevenly that morning, bounced with an energy he hadn't felt in years. In her other arm, she clutched a well-loved, one-eyed teddy bear, its fur matted from 1,000 bedtime stories and wiped away tears. Daniel glanced down at his own clothes. The whispers weren't just in his head. He knew exactly how he looked. His jeans were faded, with a small tear near the knee from kneeling to fix Lily's bicycle chain the day before. His shirt, once a crisp blue, was now soft and worn, the collar permanently curled. He'd tried to iron it, but his cheap iron had given up weeks ago. Under his fingernails, a faint dark line of grease he couldn't scrub away was a souvenir from the late nights he spent as a freelance mechanic, fixing other people's cars just so he could keep his own running. He was a ghost of the man he once was, a man who wore a different kind of uniform, one pressed with military precision, a man whose hands, now calloused from wrenches, once expertly guided instruments of immense power through the heavens. But that man was gone, buried with his wife, Sarah. Now, he was just Dad, a role he cherished more than any rank, but one that took every ounce of him, leaving nothing for himself. When they reached the gate for Flight 478, the judgment was so thick you could feel it. It was a full flight, and the waiting area seemed determined to find him wanting. A businessman in a suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent glanced up from his laptop, his lip curling in a silent sneer. He looked at Daniel's scuffed work boots, then back at his own polished Italian leather shoes with a self-satisfied smirk. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he saw the world as a ladder. He was at the top, and people like Daniel were just the rungs at the bottom. A few seats over, a couple whispered behind their hands. The woman, draped in gold jewelry and an overpowering floral perfume, eyed the frayed strap of Daniel's backpack. "Can you imagine," she muttered to her husband, just loud enough to be heard, "letting yourself go like that? Some people just have no pride." Her husband grunted, rustling his newspaper as if the sight of Daniel was a personal insult. Daniel felt a hot flush of shame and anger rise in his cheeks, but he pushed it down. He looked at Lily, who was humming a tune to her bear, totally unaware of the contempt surrounding her father. Her innocence was his shield. His pride wasn't in his clothes, it was in her smile. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise to protect her from the world's cruelty. When their boarding group was called, the judgment continued. As Daniel shuffled down the narrow aisle, trying to manage his backpack and guide Lily. He accidentally brushed against Marcus Thorne, who was already in his premium aisle seat. "Watch it!" Thorne snapped, wiping at his pristine sleeve as if Daniel had contaminated it. "Sorry," Daniel mumbled, his voice hoarse. He pushed forward, his shoulders hunched, trying to make himself smaller. Their seats, of course, were in the very back, 22B and 22C, the cramped row by the lavatories that didn't recline. As Daniel tried to lift his heavy backpack into the overhead bin, his tired muscles screamed. The bag held his life, a few changes of clothes, his essential tools, and a small, heavy box he guarded with his life. He struggled for a moment, the bag catching on the edge. A line of impatient passengers was forming. A woman behind him sighed loudly. From the front, a flight attendant with a surgically attached smile called out, "Sir, could you please hurry? We need to close the doors for an on-time departure." Her tone was a masterclass in polite condescension. It said he was incompetent, a bumbling fool holding everyone up. The blood rushed to Daniel's face. He remembered a time when he handled equipment 1,000 times more complex under unimaginable pressure. And here he was, being patronized over a backpack. With one final, desperate heave, he shoved the bag into place and slumped into his seat. 22C. Lily scrambled past him to the window, pressing her face to the glass, her excitement a stark contrast to his bone-deep weariness. He was just a single dad, exhausted and out of place. A man whose story was written in the lines on his face and the calluses on his hands. A story no one on this plane wanted to read. They'd already written their own. They couldn't have been more wrong. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Brenda, started the safety demonstration with a robotic cheerfulness. Her eyes swept the cabin, but when they landed on Daniel and Lily, they lingered for a fraction of a second too long. It was a look he knew well, a quick assessment that cataloged his wrinkled shirt, Lily's mismatched socks, and the general air of struggle that clung to him. During beverage service, the small cuts continued. When the cart reached their row, Brenda's smile tightened. "Beverages?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Just water for me, please," Daniel said quietly. "And could my daughter have some apple juice?" Brenda poured the water, but then made a show of hunting for the juice. "I'll have to see if we have any left," she said, as if this was a huge inconvenience. She came back a moment later with a half-filled cup. "Last one," she announced, as if she'd just performed a miracle. Lily took it with a polite, "Thank you," but Brenda had already turned away. Marcus Thorne, the businessman in front, ordered a scotch and swirled it with a loud sigh of satisfaction. Then he reclined his seat with a sudden, jarring thud. The little space Daniel had vanished, the seat back now inches from his face. He bit back a curse and shifted, his knees digging into the hard plastic. He wanted to say something, but he knew it would just be another confrontation, another chance for him to be the bad guy, so he sat in silence. But the real humiliation came an hour into the flight. Lily, busy with a coloring book, accidentally knocked over her small cup of apple juice. The sticky liquid spilled onto her tray table and trickled down to the floor, splashing the trousers of the woman across the aisle, the same one who had whispered about him at the gate. She let out a dramatic gasp. "Oh, for heaven's sake! This is silk!" she cried, dabbing at the tiny spot as if it were a mortal wound. "Can't you control your child?" Her husband glared at Daniel. "What kind of father are you? This is a public airplane, not your messy living room." "I am so sorry," Daniel said immediately, his face burning. He knelt in the cramped aisle with a handful of napkins, trying to clean up the spill. "It was an accident. Lily, apologize to the lady." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the woman wasn't interested. "Sorry doesn't fix a $1,000 pair of pants," she sniffed, loud enough for the whole back of the plane to hear. Brenda, the flight attendant, arrived, her face a mask of annoyed duty. She looked right past the spill and at Daniel, kneeling on the floor. "Sir, please return to your seat. I'll handle this." Her tone was that of a teacher scolding a child. She handed the woman a wet wipe with a sympathetic smile. then shot Daniel a look of pure exasperation. The message was clear. This was his fault. He and his disruptive child were the problem. He sank back into his seat, rigid with anger. He pulled Lily close as she buried her face in his side, her small body shaking with silent sobs. He whispered in her ear, "It's okay, sweetie. It's okay. It wasn't your fault." But it felt like his fault, his failure, his inability to provide a life where his daughter wouldn't be judged for an accidental spill. The whispers started again, a chorus of confirmation. "See? We were right about him. Messy. Incompetent." The labels stuck to him, heavier than any bag. The entire cabin, it seemed, had reached its verdict. The single dad in 22C was a nuisance, and Daniel, for his daughter's sake, just sat there and took it. In the silence that followed, Daniel Hayes retreated into himself. Every instinct, sharpened by years in a life no one here could imagine, screamed at him to react. The man he used to be would have stood up. He would have met the flight attendant's condescending gaze with a look of steel that would have shattered her fake smile. He would have addressed the entitled couple with a calm, cutting authority that would have silenced them for good. But that man, Captain Daniel Hayes, was on indefinite leave. In his place was a father, and a father's first mission isn't to win battles of pride, but to protect his child. He felt Lily's tears soaking his shirt. Her little, shuddering breaths were like daggers. He looked out the window at the endless blue, a world where he had once been a king. Up here, he had been in command. He was respected not for his money, but for his skill and courage, for his call sign. The name Falcon 27 carried weight. It meant help was on the way. It meant no one got left behind. Down here, in the recycled air of Seat 22C, that name meant nothing. Here, he was just a clumsy father with a frayed collar. The irony was bitter. He had defended the very freedoms that allowed people to sneer at him over a drop of juice. He'd flown through storms of anti-aircraft fire, his hands steady on the controls, and brought his team home from impossible missions, earning medals he kept in a box he never opened. He could feel the other passengers watching, waiting for him to crack, waiting for him to yell and prove their assumptions right. And so, he did the hardest thing he could do. He did nothing. He refused to give them the satisfaction. His jaw was tight, but his hands were gentle as he stroked Lily's hair. He focused all his immense self-discipline on her. "Hey," he whispered, turning her face towards him. "Look at me. Did I ever tell you about the cloud dragons?" Lily sniffled, her teary eyes wide with curiosity. No. "Well," he began, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Up here, this high, the clouds are really sleeping dragons. See that big one over there? The one that looks like a giant ball of cotton? That's a granddaddy dragon. He's very old and very wise." He pointed out the window, creating a fantasy world from the clouds. He spoke of dragon families and sky castles until, slowly, Lily's sobs subsided, replaced by a small, watery smile. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the humiliation of a few moments ago already starting to fade. Daniel kept his gaze fixed out the window. He didn't look at the woman across the aisle. He didn't look at the flight attendant. In his disciplined silence, in his complete focus on his child, he deployed a weapon they couldn't understand: dignity. They could judge his clothes and mock his life, but they couldn't touch his core. They couldn't touch his love for his daughter, and they couldn't touch the quiet, unbreakable strength of a man who had faced far worse than their petty disdain. He just had to endure a few more hours. Then they would land, and he'd never see these people again, or so he thought. 2 hours later, just as the cabin settled down, something changed. It started with a subtle shift in the engine's hum, a vibration Daniel felt in his bones before anyone else. Then, the cabin lights flickered. A nervous murmur rippled through the passengers. The flight attendants exchanged a worried look, their professional smiles gone for the first time. Then, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It wasn't the smooth, reassuring tone from the start of the flight. This voice was tight, strained. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts immediately. We are experiencing a deviation from our flight plan due to unexpected airspace restrictions. We've been instructed by NORAD to alter our course. The word NORAD silenced the cabin. North American Aerospace Defense Command. This wasn't weather. This was military. Fear spread like a chill. Whispers of terrorism and hijacking started to fly. The woman with the soaked pants gripped her husband's arm, her face pale. Marcus Thorne shoved his laptop away, his arrogance replaced by pure fear. The captain's voice came again, even more strained. We have a priority communication we must handle. Please remain calm. But nobody was calm. Daniel, however, was. His mind was working. Airspace restriction. NORAD. Priority communication. This wasn't a standard threat. This was something else. Something unusual. A minute later, the captain himself emerged from the cockpit. He was an older man with silver hair and a face that looked like it had seen it all. But right now, he looked shaken. He strode down the aisle, his eyes scanning the seat numbers. Not looking for a threat, but for a person. He stopped at row 22. He looked directly at Daniel. The entire cabin turned to stare at the weary man in seat 22C. The captain held a satellite phone, a piece of equipment never used for civilian matters. He leaned down, his voice a low, respectful whisper that was still heard by the rows nearby. "Sir," he began, his voice trembling slightly. I don't know how. They're asking for you. NORAD command. They're asking for your call sign." Daniel just stared at him. He hadn't heard that term in years. The entire cabin held its breath. "Sir, please," the captain urged, holding out the phone. "It's a priority directive. They said it involves presidential transit." Slowly, Daniel took the phone. The weight of it was familiar. He raised it to his ear. "This is Daniel Hayes." A pause. Then, he spoke 3 words that shattered reality for everyone on that plane. 3 words from a world of courage and legend. "This is Falcon 27. The captain, still standing beside Daniel, looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He took a step back and grabbed the cabin intercom. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer strained with fear. It was filled with a deep, resonating reverence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cracking with emotion. "I apologize for the alarm. There is no danger. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We've been instructed to inform you why we changed course." He paused, taking a deep breath and looking straight at Daniel. "We are honored and humbled to have a national hero on board with us. The man in seat 22C is former Captain Daniel Hayes of the United States Air Force. He is a decorated pilot, a man to whom many people, including those in the highest levels of our government, owe their lives. His call sign, Falcon 27, is one of legend." A collective gasp swept through the cabin. The woman in silk went pale. Marcus Thorne looked as if he'd been punched. But the captain wasn't done. Moments ago, Air Force One, carrying the President of the United States, entered our flight path. When NORAD notified them that Falcon 27 was on this flight, the President himself gave a direct order. As a sign of respect for a pilot who once protected his predecessors, Air Force One has diverted from its course. It is holding a protective position, and he has authorized an honor escort. As the captain spoke those last words, a thunderous roar ripped through the sky. On both sides of the plane, 2 F-22 Raptors materialized out of thin air. They were breathtakingly close. One pilot, visible in his cockpit, raised a gloved hand in a slow, deliberate salute, his eyes fixed on the window of row 22. The revelation was complete. The quiet, messy man in 22C was not just a hero. He was the kind of hero who could command the sky, the kind of hero for whom Air Force One itself would move aside. The silence in the cabin was no longer fear. It was a deep, suffocating quiet of awe and shame. The 2 F-22 Raptors held their position, flanking the airliner like magnificent, loyal guardians. It was a stark, powerful, and undeniable message sent to every single person on that flight. Passengers who had been annoyed by minor inconveniences were now faced with a reality that dwarfed their petty concerns. They were in the presence of greatness, and they had treated it like garbage. Marcus Thorne was frozen. The world he knew, measured in stock prices and tailored suits, had been turned upside down. He had judged a man by his worn-out shoes, and that man had just been honored by the president. He had never felt so small in his life. Across the aisle, the woman with the silk pants was openly weeping, not from fear, but from mortifying shame. Her $1,000 pants seemed like a foolish, trivial thing now. She remembered her sharp words, "Can't you control your child?" and felt sick. Her husband sat beside her, staring at the floor, his face beet red. Brenda, the flight attendant, stood motionless in the aisle. Her condescending tone, her impatience. She had treated a hero like a problem. Her professionalism was revealed as nothing more than shallow judgment. Slowly, one passenger started to clap. An older man, maybe a veteran himself, stood up and began a slow, respectful applause. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire cabin erupted. It was an apology, an act of contrition, a desperate attempt to show the respect they had so utterly failed to give. People were on their feet, craning their necks to see him. "Thank you for your service," a man shouted. Through it all, Daniel remained in his seat. He didn't stand or bask in the applause. He took no pleasure in their shame. He just turned to his daughter. Lily, who had been watching the fighter jets with wide-eyed wonder, looked up at him. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Are those your friends?" A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He pulled her into a tight hug, burying his face in her hair as the applause roared around them. "Yes, sweetie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They're friends. They're just watching over us, making sure we're safe, just like I'll always watch over you." The jets held their escort for another 10 minutes, a silent honor guard in the sky. Then, with a final, coordinated wing tilt, a salute from one warrior to another, they peeled away and vanished. As the plane began its descent, the captain's voice came on one last time. "As we approach, the ground crew has requested to perform a water cannon salute. This is an honor usually reserved for a retiring captain. Today, it is for the man in seat 22C. When the plane taxied to the gate, it passed under two towering streams of water. Through the windows, passengers could see ground crew on the tarmac. Their work paused, many holding their hands over their hearts. The story had already spread. The humiliation of Daniel Hayes was over. When the plane docked and the seatbelt sign pinged off, there was no rush for the exits. The usual frantic energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, somber respect. Everyone stayed seated. They were waiting. The captain came out of the cockpit, walked directly to row 22, and offered a crisp, formal salute. "Captain Hayes," he said, "it has been an honor to fly you today. Thank you for your service." Daniel looked up and gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Captain. Smooth flight." He unbuckled his seatbelt and took Lily's hand. The passengers ahead parted, creating a clear path. No one spoke. They just moved aside, their faces a mix of shame and awe. As he walked down the aisle, he passed Marcus Thorne. "Sir," Marcus began, his voice a whisper. I am so sorry." Daniel paused. He looked at the man, not with anger, but with a quiet pity. He said nothing, his silence more powerful than any words. He just kept walking. He passed the woman in silk, her face buried in her hands, and Brenda, the flight attendant, who stood rigidly by the exit, her eyes downcast. In the jet bridge, a uniformed Air Force officer was waiting. He snapped to attention. "Captain Hayes, sir. Welcome home. We've arranged your ground transportation." Daniel just nodded. "Thank you." He took Lily's hand, and they walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving behind a plane full of people who would never be the same. As they left, Lily looked up at her father. "Daddy, why were they all clapping? And why did that man salute you?" Daniel knelt down to her level. Sometimes, sweetie, he said softly, people forget to be kind. They get busy and judge things on the outside without knowing what's on the inside. Today, they just got a little reminder. A reminder about what? She asked. He smiled, a true, warm smile this time. That kindness doesn't need a uniform, and respect is for everyone, not just for people with fancy titles. The story of the man in seat 22C is a fictional tale. In the real world, airspace security is strict, and a presidential escort wouldn't divert for this reason. But the lesson it holds is very real. We live in a world that's quick to judge based on clothes, a job, or the weariness in someone's eyes. We forget that behind every ordinary face, there might be an extraordinary story of sacrifice and silent strength. We pass heroes on the street every day. The single mother working 2 jobs, the teacher shaping a future, the veteran who quietly carries the weight of their service. They don't ask for applause. Their medals are the calluses on their hands and the unwavering love they give their families. The man in seat 22C didn't need a grand gesture to know his own worth. His honor lived in the quiet dignity with which he endured their scorn and the gentle love with which he comforted his daughter. But for the other passengers, that dramatic reveal was a necessary, humbling lesson. It forced them to look past the frayed collar and see the hero underneath. It was a reminder that the quietest person in the room might just be the one who has fought the hardest battles. So, let this story be our reminder. Before we judge, before we whisper, #meta, sex 0.05, before we dismiss, let's pause. Let's choose kindness. Let's offer respect, not because it's earned by a title, but simply because it's deserved by another human being. You never know when you might be sitting next to the man in seat 22C. If this story touched your soul, please hit the like button and share it. Spreading stories of respect and honor is one way we can pay tribute to our quiet heroes. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational narratives. In the comments below, we'd love for you to share a story about a hidden hero in your own life. Let's fill this space with gratitude for the people who make our world a better place.